that need?
Yeah, so the long-term health monitoring, by the way, is something that we're very focused on, and I'm personally very focused on. It's something my Senate office worked a great deal on, and frankly was very disappointed that the Biden administration wasn't willing to meet us halfway there. We're going to do a lot there, and I think there's a lot that could be done. On the disaster declaration, it's an interesting question, because a disaster declaration may have been very helpful 18 months ago. I don't know that it's still helpful today. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the governor behind me, I'm going to talk to Lee about this, and I'm going to say, is a disaster declaration still helpful? Because if the answer is yes, then I'm going to take that message back to Washington. But the answer may well be no, right? Because we're not in the same phase of this thing now that we were 2 years ago. Thank God for that. We're going to do right by the community. That answer may not be the same as it was 18 months ago, but we're still going to work at it.
Mr. Vice President, in talking to locals as we have the last 2 years, many of them say that they're now worse off than they were before.
Yes.
They're closing their businesses, selling their businesses. What can you tell them now in this forum that they're going to hear at some point in the next 24 hours that leaves them thinking this is not just more lip service that they have heard for the last 2 years?
So I guess what I'd ask him is, first of all, you're right. A lot of people in East Palestine have dealt with unspeakable tragedy and then economic calamity on top of that. I've talked to a lot of local businesses just here today who have lost customers, who feel like the bottom line is a lot worse than it was before this disaster happened. And that's local retailers, that's oil and gas businesses. But I guess what I'd ask them is, don't give up on this community, because we're not going to give up on this community. And it's not always going to be easy, and I'm not going to be able to take away the 2 years of economic pain that have been caused by this train disaster. But you do now have a government that cares about you, that's going to work on these problems, and isn't going to snap its fingers and fix everything, because that's not how any of this works, but is going to fight every single day to make sure you get the infrastructure, the redevelopment aid, and certainly the health and environmental aid that you need to get back on your feet. I really do believe that if we work this the right way, that if the federal government, the state government, the EPA administrator, and the people on the ground are willing to work for this community, then we're going to do better by East Palestine than we have over the last couple of years. That's certainly my commitment to this community. Okay, John.
We talked rail safety probably more than anything over the last 2 years. When you introduced it, you spoke for yourself, you spoke for the constituents of Ohio. You now speak for the administration.
Sure.
Does the administration stand behind the Rail Safety Act as you introduced it?
Well, John, the president endorsed the Rail Safety Act, of course, when it came out. And so certainly I think that we can say with confidence the president shares my view that we need some common sense rail safety. And yes, that is something that we're going to work on over the next couple of years. It's something that I think that we have a much better shot at, frankly, with Republicans in charge. Remember, we had the legislation. It was bipartisan. We had it in a place where it would have passed the United States Senate. Chuck Schumer just refused to bring it up to the floor for a vote. And so, yeah, I think things are a little bit different this time, and we're going to make sure we get this right.
Mr. Vice President.
Now, Henry asked me a question about tariffs. Let me say this, Henry. So I think for a couple of, look, not just a couple of years, for 40 years, with one very obvious exception, I think that we have had successive administrations who have not recognized that America's economic power is not just a source of prosperity, but is also something that we should be willing to put to use to make the American people safer and healthier. And unfortunately, we have had, especially at our southern border, a southern neighbor, and I think an important ally if they want to be, who has not taken their basic responsibility seriously about securing their own border and doing basic law enforcement within their own country. Now, what's happened? What's happened is that even in communities like East Palestine, you have seen a massive explosion in the amount of deadly, poisonous fentanyl that exists in this country. We've seen the toll in orphan children, in families who have lost loved ones, in over 100,000 lives per year, most of which have come, 100,000 lives per year lost to drug overdose, most of which have come from the fentanyl problem. Mexico has got to do a better job, and President Trump's message is very simple. We are done being taken advantage of. Now, actually, I was in the air. I talked to the president very briefly about this. He spoke with the president of Mexico this morning, and the president of Mexico committed to putting 10,000 additional Mexican troops on that southern border, our southern border, of course, the Mexicans' northern border, to take law enforcement more seriously, to go after those Mexican drug cartels a little bit more aggressively. So for literally 3 days, I heard the far left in this country say that these tariffs would make Americans' lives worse off, and what actually happened is the Mexican government was so afraid of the tariffs that they actually are taking their border enforcement and their anti-cartel activity more seriously. That is not a pathway to making Americans worse off. That's a pathway to making Americans better off. Now, the president has also been very clear that we have to rebalance our trade relationship in this country. Every single country, if you look, even our northern neighbors, Canada, do Americans realize that the Canadians charge massive, massive tariffs on our products that go into the country of Canada, including on our great agricultural products that people right here in the state of Ohio depend on? Well, if the Canadians are going to use their economic power to penalize Americans, I think it's totally reasonable for the American president to say, we're done being taken advantage of. We, of course, want to have a great relationship with Canada, but that goes both directions. And that's all his conduct and his activity of the last few days was about. We're done being taken advantage of in this country. We have got to rebalance the trade relationship between ourselves and our allies, ourselves and our adversaries. President Trump is committed to that, and tariffs is one tool that he's going to use to accomplish it.
President, listening, talking to folks today and over the last few years, the biggest thing they heard is they don't want this to happen in another community. What are some of those action items you heard talking to the folks during your visit today you can take back to D.C., kind of, all right, let's hit the ground running on these things?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Most of what I heard today was actually concerns about economic development. Okay, but of course, I've been to East Palestine. This is my, I think, 5th or 6th visit. I've heard a lot about the concerns related to rail safety. And I think there are a few very basic common sense things that can be done. And look, some of this the railways are already doing, but some of this I truly believe is going to have to happen through things like the Railway Safety Act. Number one, you've got to inspect these cars more before they go off. You've got to better use technology to monitor when a train is about to have a catastrophic failure. These are all things that were sort of built into the infrastructure of the Railway Safety Act, and it's something we're going to keep on working on. Look, this can't happen again. As much as I believe in East Palestine, and I really do believe in this community and its people, what they're rebuilding through shouldn't have happened. It's not their fault, and if we can take any learning from this, it's hopefully not to force another community to go through it again.
Residents still want more assurance.
So to Lee Zeldin, one of the things that was done, the question that's still raised is why the initial burn was allowed to happen from the EPA standpoint in the first place. And then when that plume went across into Pennsylvania and other states, a lot of testing wasn't done there. Back to what you were just talking about, the tariffs. So much money was spent on foreign countries, on allowing illegals into our southern border. A lot of this community feels like they've been abandoned, and it's been addressed already. But what is going to be done tangibly that you can see going forward that may address some of those? Will there be more testing done on areas that haven't been tested yet? More funding or holding Norfolk Southern accountable, more than the $70,000 they've offered per person?
Yeah, so a couple of quick things on that, and I'll take one more question, then we'll have to hit the road. So if you go back to the original promises that Norfolk Southern made, right? One, there was a big settlement for all the people who were personally injured from the disaster. I'm not talking about the environmental problems. I'm talking about those who were directly injured, like some of the chief's firefighters who sacrificed and need to be compensated for it. It turns out that a lot of those compensation promises have not been met, even though they've been built into court orders. That is unacceptable. We're going to talk to Norfolk Southern about it. Another Norfolk Southern promise is we talked about building a training facility in East Palestine that would train firefighters from Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Ohio. But also, and the governor made this point to me privately, unfortunately, the firefighters behind me know more about how to deal with a railway disaster than almost any firefighting corps in the entire country. Let's turn that into knowledge that we can spread across this tri-state area and actually make better firefighters, or at least more well-trained firefighters, out of that process. Well, Norfolk Southern promised they were going to provide the money to build that training facility, and every single person to a man has told me that money has not come. Well, that's unacceptable too. So I think that a lot of this comes down to making sure the promises of Norfolk Southern actually turn from promises into reality, and that's something we're going to work on and certainly take back to Washington.
Residents still want more assurance. Vice President, residents still want more assurance that any health concerns in the future will be covered, and they also want further health studies, which may be highly unlikely if the administration is making cuts to agencies like the National Institute of Health and the CDC. So what will you do about this?
Well, first of all, I'd say cutting ridiculous bureaucracy is actually facilitates providing important services to people here on the ground. We all know that we have a government that wastes too much money, frankly, where there's a lot of fraud built into how our government spends money. And one of the things that does is waste taxpayer dollars. But the other thing that it does is it ensures that the money that we have in our resources at the federal government don't end up going to the people who actually deserve it. And so President Trump's desire to bring some efficiency back to the federal government, that's not going to be bad for the people of East Palestine. It's actually going to ensure that the resources we spend on health actually go to people on the ground rather than bureaucrats. And frankly, we're not talking about a lot of money. When I was working on this with the Biden administration, we needed $5 million to start the long-term health study that we wanted to start. I know there's some negotiation about where exactly that money is going to come from. I think it should come from Norfolk Southern and not from the taxpayers. But we are committed to ensuring that people's long-term health needs are met on the one hand, and that those long-term health questions are answered. I really do believe that a critical piece of rebuilding East Palestine is giving people confidence that they can raise a family in health and safety here in this community. Now, I believe that's true, but the only way that other people are going to believe that's true is if folks like Lee Zeldin at the EPA and the broader administration take those health and safety concerns seriously. I promise the people of East Palestine we are taking those concerns seriously, and we will do so for the remainder of President Trump's administration. God bless you guys. Thank you for being here.
All of them unplugged. Can you unplug me? You guys unplug this, please. All the ones that all the pull ones. There's no more sound. Yeah, that one. Just push the button.
Sorry.
There we go. Thank you. Jack, grab my camera.
Now, the rule I've learned is that if you can't see the camera can't see you. So if my big head is in front of somebody, then move me or move yourself. Got it right?
To consider several bills under suspension of the rules, including legislation requiring the